Welcome to another episode of the Information Addicts Podcast. My name is Cassidy. I'm an information addict, and this is my podcast where I explore information, ideas, and beliefs and try to do those things more responsibly. Welcome to season 4 of this little project. To kick it off, I have a conversation with my friend Christain. I've had a lot of conversations over the years with Christain, but this is our third recorded conversation for this project. I've included links to the previous conversation below, but today's conversation topic is revisiting the first conversation topic we actually ever had on this channel, which was about the masculine and the feminine. We had a wide-ranging conversation about a lot of different topics, from the Manosphere to Taylor Swift and everything in between, in terms of male and female dynamics and gender conversations. And we tried our best to have a more productive conversation than what you generally see online. I definitely really enjoyed the conversation, and I hope you will too. Christain, hello.
Hello.
Welcome back to my channel, in whatever form this comes out.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. You've been on the channel before, so I won't have you go through the rigmarole of who you are. People can go back and watch that if they want to. But you messaged me and said you wanted to talk about Barbie, and that was about it. So I'll throw it off to you, and we'll see where this goes.
Yeah, so it wasn't Barbie per se, but I did watch, I think, one of PVK's live stream things, and it was focused on Barbie, where it was all of the, I guess, the PVK All-Stars, and you're part of that, all taking your shots and doing like a Barbie exegesis. So I thought it was really interesting, and then I remember I thought it was really interesting. And then I remember the first time you ever had a recorded episode where we talked about like the rise and fall of Mars Hill podcasts, and it was a topic that was focused on masculinity, and it was so ironic because that was 3 years. I want to say that was 3 years ago or 2 years ago, or
Gosh.
it was some time ago, and then all of a sudden this something hits the web culture about masculinity, and Barbie, and I was just like, huh.
It's cyclical.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's true. I mean, I think it's a question that I've been circling around for a long time and not quite sure how to talk about it. Because
Okay.
there's a lot of polarization when it comes to it, but a lot of interesting questions to be asked. So, yeah, it is funny that that was one of the early things I released, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. So what was going through my head was just like, this is so ironic. I didn't even think about it until you started talking on the live stream video. And even then, when we filmed that, or when we did that episode way back when, it was something I hardly ever thought about. That's why I didn't really have anything. I didn't really have content like prepared in my mind as points of discussion. All those years ago, it was kind of one of those, like, I don't no brainers, I guess. I don't know, like, um so it wasn't Barbie per se that I wanted to speak about, although I did watch it with my wife and her mom. um but I think it was sort of like a, yeah, I guess I did want to talk about it, like what did you like, what do you like, what's going on in the world now,
Yeah, well, I think men and women are both confused about what it is to be men and women. That certainly for sure. There's a lot of people providing answers. I personally feel a lot of them are not the full picture or the most well-formed. And that's where it gets hard to kind of get to the place of where do you go to get good answers to those questions. And, obviously as a religious person, I tend towards finding those answers in religious stories and understanding that. But even then, that kind of gets tricky for a lot of people, especially if they don't have a confidence in a religious tradition. Which is interesting. That's why I found Greta Gerwig's film so interesting, because from what I understand of her from interviews and watching her other films, she's kind of in that place where she has an interest in religion. She seems to have somewhat of a positive perception of it, at least to a point. But I don't know if she even knows exactly what that is and what that means and how to participate with that. And I don't know. It was a different side of the story from someone kind of in that place than what I had heard in other places. And so it intrigued me, and I thought, okay, this could open the door to possibly a better conversation about how do we have those questions. I don't know. What did you think of it?
Um, I didn't think, I thought that people overthought this movie, and I was a little underwhelmed with it, if I'm being honest. And I thought I thought they could have done a little bit more with the I guess the how would you word it? Like the shallow pieces of it. Like they could have done
Sure.
more with the fun stuff. Like they could have done more dance numbers
Yeah.
and more, pop songs and silly things like that. I think that would have maybe lightened it a little bit, but they kind of, it seemed like, especially with the kind of language that they use, they just kind of went right for the kill. And I was like, okay, well, they weren't wrong about that. Everything that I heard about the movie going into it, I was like kind of bracing myself, and then I hear them start talking and I was like, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
But it wasn't as hard hitting as I thought all this dialogue about the movie warranted.
Yeah. Expound on that. I want to understand what you mean by the hard hitting, like how you're perceiving it.
Yeah, the plane didn't land very well at the end. I think they really open, like at the climax of the movie, like where they bring in like the creator of Barbie, and I think they opened up a huge door that like didn't could not possibly be explored in the amount of time that was going to be left in the movie for the runtime of
Sure.
that kind of film. But they didn't, and so it was almost like they couldn't land the plane. Like no point could really be delivered from there. So I don't know.
Yeah.
That was my take, but I'm not like an expert in film like you are. I've gotten a lot more into films over the last few years, and but I know that that's like your thing. So I figured I
Yeah.
would
But
hear you out on this one.
well, I mean, it's hard to say because it depends on art. In a lot of ways, is subjective to a point, um, but it's also sort of like, well, what was her aim in making this film? Was her aim to solve problems of matriarchy, patriarchy, men women dynamics, or was it trying to explore human behavior and the process of those things and open the door to potentially laying the seeds to kind of ask better questions about how we handle men and women dynamics? I think it was the second. And in that sense, while it might not be a satisfying ending in the sense that, um, it puts a bow on it and we get an answer and, everybody, has a happily ever after. But, that sort of question of what was I made for? I think that is a super good question to ask if we're wanting to really get to the core of the the conversations that are being had around this question. And the way that she wrote the dialogue, I think a lot of people, she's certainly left leaning. That's clear, and you can take that from her interviews. But I think her inclusion of certain dialogue for an ideology should not necessarily be taken that she thinks this is the right ideology and the way it should be played out. I think she's seeing what's true in the world, heightening it to its extreme to kind of bring up things that are underlying in those, and then letting that play out to have a conversation. And I think what she did was super ambitious. I understand why some people don't like it, but I do think that um, there was like a skill to what she did that um, might have been a distraction if she had more um, dance numbers and things. Which, I love a good dance number, but I can respect her artistry in that and her vision in that. Certainly don't think everything was perfect in the answers to those questions or how things wrapped up, but I can't find a perfect movie anywhere.
But did you feel like at least the story like was satisfied, or do you think, or was it kind of just like, all right, I'm not even like thinking about that. It's a more now she got me on this question, so I'm actually going to I'm kind of more hooked on that than I am about the actual story of this movie.
Yeah, I mean the plot was definitely absurdist, and there were certain things that's like that's a huge plot hole, but she kind of was doing that on purpose, right? Like,
Okay.
oh, don't worry about that. Like she's playing up that on that absurdity, and I think she is sort of playing on this idea of how do we play as kids? Oh, the robot comes in and he crushes the space station, and what are the physics of that? We're not asking that question.
Yeah.
We're 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 playing in a different realm. And so I think in some ways that's a feature of the film, not a bug. But I
Mhm.
definitely
Oh, okay.
understand why that bothers people. But I really think that was an intentional choice more than she wasn't thinking through what she was doing.
Hmm.
But again, these are sort of like there's two questions I always kind of wrestle with when we're talking about watching movies. There's the consumer part and then the creator part. And so there's a lot of conversation to be had as creators, like how do we tell good stories? How do we tell stories that are true, beautiful, and good? And how do we check ourselves in creating those things where we don't create propaganda that is just taking the ideal story that we see in our head and creating a movie to get everybody to align with us on that. There's that can be really dangerous. Um, Yet there's part of that where you have to recognize if you're not allowing yourself to let the true good and beautiful things that you see in the world affect the way you create, um, it's going to create something that's um, not very deep. and
Yeah.
and so there's this one side, and that's where as a film I think it was very beautiful. Now there's the consumer side, and it's like how do we take this in, and how should we interact with movies? And for myself, I always look at movies more as these are not things to tell me how I should behave, even if that is the intent of the creator. I see them as ways to learn about people and what they believe and how they see the world. And some of it's not so good, some of it's better. We're humans, we're kind of a mixed bag. But if I can be intentional in engaging the world in that, I have a better understanding of the fuller scope of the human experience. And I always think it's really helpful to take those expressions and ground that in a spiritual home in whatever way that can make sense to you. Because if you don't have some sort of spiritual thing to ground you in that, you are just sort of creating stories, and that can create chaos. It's much more difficult
Yeah.
if you're not at the place where you feel like you know what that means, like what it is to pursue spirituality well. That's like a huge question. And I still struggle with that, even being embedded in a faith that I have a lot of confidence in, being Christianity, and then, even more narrow with Orthodoxy. But yeah, that I think is super important when we're consuming anything and consuming stories. And like you really look at ancient texts, and like religious texts, a lot of them are very story driven. And so we learn more from stories, and those shape our beliefs more than um, sort of just the information that we consume, I believe. That's kind of what I feel like I've learned as I've wrestled through these things and gone through that place where I tried to use information to help guide my thinking. It definitely helped. I don't think that there's not a place for that. But the stories we tell ourselves are much more impactful on what we're believing than, what argument we can make with the information provided to us through logic and reason. And
Hmm.
so I do think as consumers, we have to be intentional about that and recognize that we can read a film, but sometimes the film reads us. And yeah, I think one thing that's really helpful in kind of having these questions is having conversations like this, where we're not just watching the film, coming to a conclusion with it and walking away and then not really delving in. Like, if you can have that conversation of the back and forth and sort of delve deep and kind of be intrigued by the story, I think that can be really helpful in kind of making sense of the proper place that these stories have in our lives. I don't know if that answered your question.
No, I mean, no, I guess it didn't. But I mean, it brings up other it brings up other um, maybe more interesting conversation.
Yeah.
So, um, I mean, it's not. This is your podcast, so you could drive the conversation.
Yeah, but
Um,
that's not fun, I like the push and pull.
yeah.
Lay it on me. What do you want to talk about?
Well, so what did you think about? So, I mean, I almost I feel like I could kind of ask questions that go more along the lines of like film and filmmaking because I know that's sort of your thing.
Yeah.
But then also questions about that topic,
Mm,
and I'm gonna go more that way. So,
okay.
I what uh what do you think about the timing of this film of Barbie and when it came out?
Hmm.
Because I think that was because for me personally, I was expecting it to kind of throw fuel on the fire, and I don't know if it did. I'm not really sure if it did or didn't.
Yeah, it's sort of weird in timing where it's almost, you can't say we're at the end of the road on this, but it also doesn't feel like we're in the thick of it. And so, how would this film have been received a year ago? I think probably, worse by both sides. So, is that a good sign or a bad sign? I want to be hopeful and say that's good, but if I'm fully honest, I don't know. Um, I, hmm. I mean, I definitely think there was some kind of recognition of sort of the bubble that Hollywood's in, where they were like, I can't believe they let us make this movie. Which is like, on one hand, I understand it, but on the other hand, I think it's not as controversial as they we think it is in our head. Like, it's not weird anymore to have someone on either side of the aisle making the kind of comments that were laid in Barbie movie in public. That's sort of the sign of the discourse. Um, and I guess there's something sort of hopeful that there is thoughtful um, acceptance of this film, which means maybe we're moving towards a less divisive conversation. Um, but it's hard. It's hard to know altogether because you can't really know fully until you look backwards and see it in the grand scope of everything. It's like trying
Mm.
to trying to understand it when you're still sort of in the fog. But I'm also kind of unsure exactly what the temperature of the conversation is, um, outside of um, like the circles that I'm in. And a lot of the
Hmm.
circles that I'm in, for most of my life have been high internet circles and a lot of high religiosity or the opposite, lack thereof. But a lot of them are on the internet consuming a lot of media. I think those issues probably feel more divisive and present than for those who aren't on the internet all the time. Um,
Speaking of temperature, what's the weather like in the Netherlands where you are?
it snowed today, so it's.
Okay.
Uh, I think it's below freezing, but it's just below or around at freezing.
Okay. Yeah, so it's like that here too in Missouri, and I actually have never been in negative temperature before. So if I look cold, I'm cold. Like I'm in my my basement office, and yeah, I think there's just some kind of, I don't know, it gets cold, and particularly in this room. So I'm like freezing, just in case you like
Start
notice that or
shivering,
not.
you go
Well, I
blue.
feel like I am, and I'm not sure if you can tell, but
I haven't noticed it, but don't worry,
okay.
I'm cold too. I've got slippers on under here.
Yeah.
I'm trying to stay warm. us
Yeah, I
us
got
desert people, although you're from California, so not quite the desert, but you lived in the desert for a while.
I did. Yeah,
We're not used to it.
not used to this, no. Like
Mm.
it snowed, but it's not like pretty, it's not beautiful out. It's kind of like just ugly and icy.
Mm.
So,
Yeah, same.
sorry. Anyway,
Yeah, I mean, hmm. Where do you see the temperature with it all? Because
okay, so that is what I found the most interesting because when we last spoke, we had a conversation about the rise and fall of Mars Hill. So you
Mhm.
were then, and you can obviously correct me if I'm wrong on anything, at this time sort of transitioning out of evangelicalism, uh, making your way into orthodoxy. You obviously are significantly involved in, like, you have a particular interest in media and the online space, and you like podcasts, and you hear this Mars Hill podcast, and it's throwing out all these blows at evangelicalism
Mhm.
and culture,
Mhm.
and it's, you know, um, the problematic contribution to culture in terms of gender and all these kinds of things. And then you're making your way into orthodoxy, and you get married, and you move to another country, and you become a mother.
Yeah.
But also in, uh, you know, 3 years later, along the way, this thing called the red pill manosphere makes its way into popular culture. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm sure these people have nothing to do with evangelicalism, right? And
Well,
they're
it's a
preaching
mixed bag,
purity
yeah.
culture, right? They're preaching purity culture, and
Mm,
but it's much
yeah.
more ruthless and
Well, and it
less
depends on
forgiving.
who you're talking, but a lot of it's
Right.
one-sided purity culture
Yeah.
where I want my woman pure, but I'm going to sleep with how many women I want because I'm a high-value man.
Right.
And
And
that's,
so,
you know,
yeah.
that has its own, but yeah, it depends on who you're talking because that's the extreme on one end, but there's sort of, yeah, there's an extreme of manosphere. There's like a range, right? It's
Yeah. I
interesting.
mean, I don't know how much of a range there are. I mean, like, but that's what I'm saying is like all this really weird stuff happens in culture, and especially in
Yeah.
in the YouTube. I don't know if like YouTube is sort of this cultural nucleus for uh really for everyone now, but I think specifically for Gen Z and younger. Probably everyone, though, is what I would imagine. Um, yeah, all these really odd characters start popping up. And I remember, and yeah, I've watched a lot of that stuff just because I was curious. I'm curious as to like what these people have to say about this and that. And even me having just been married in the last few years,
Right.
trying to, I want to hear what these people have to say about these topics. And uh,
Yeah.
what do you, and for me, I'm remembering, I'm looking back on the conversation we had a few years ago, and I'm thinking, Mark Driscoll is nothing compared to these guys,
No, he really
right?
isn't.
And we were
No.
complaining about that. Well, I wasn't really, but you know,
I wasn't either. And yeah, I don't remember all the details of that conversation, but I hope I didn't come off as like happy about the Mars Hill podcast because I was very torn with it.
well, no, but I think there was a question of, and it wasn't, I don't know that you even communicated this concern, but the podcast definitely filed a complaint about um misogyny and complementarianism
And like
that
toxic
stems
masculinity, yeah.
from, yeah, toxic masculinity and all these kinds of things. And it's like, oh, Mark Driscoll really appealed to men, and he appealed to men within this particular kind of way, and that was toxic. And see, this is the kind of thing that we don't want in culture. And then a couple years later, and that's what I'm kind of getting at is like,
Yeah.
I wonder if a few years later, are we still complaining about that? Like, are these kids actually wanting some of what Mark Driscoll and others were getting at?
Right. I mean, I think it feels clear that it's still concerned because of the way that the manosphere has blown up. I don't think if there was a fear of the way that we are with men and women, that would have blown up because there's these two sides that are sort of feeding each other, these extremes, and they just keep getting extreme and extreme and extreme. So it seems to me that it's still a concern. Um, I
So
guess where
let me ask you, Cassidy, have you consumed any of that content? Like in
I try not to because I don't think it's a positive thing, but I've definitely done it sort of to study it and try to understand, okay, what's actually being said. Because that's what I have a little bit of frustration with how some of these conversations online happen is where you kept one clip out of context and all of a sudden it's like, we dehumanize somebody for something that maybe it was bad, but it, you know, you're not understanding the full context. So I've watched it to see it, but this is sort of where I've kind of gotten to the point of how do we handle this question of like men and women and how we interact with each other. I don't think the best way to do it is to point out what's wrong and put them on a podium and make them feel stupid. I think probably the better way is to quietly wrestle with those questions in community and do your best to live out the ideal masculine and feminine as you can understand it. That is much harder than going on a podcast and getting a bunch of people from Tinder to tell them that
OnlyFans?
OnlyFans or whatever. Well, that's how like the whatever podcast is the one I watch the most. I haven't watched really Fresh and Fit or like
Yeah,
some of these, but I hear the names and then I watch a little bit of like just Pearly things. So that's sort of the context of where I'm
yeah.
at. But like I know the
What
whatever podcast he gets them from Tinder
yeah,
and asks them to come on. um,
right. So like that's what I was gonna ask you is like what do you think about that content? Just
I don't
yeah.
I don't think it's healthy. I
Is it
uh,
entertaining?
not not to me really.
Okay.
I'm not entertained by it. I'm emotionally driven by it, um, which is sort of why I try not to watch it because I don't think that's the best thing to help me have a spiritual part or a healthy participation in life, like whole rounded. But it makes me frustrated because on one end, some of the red pill things, it's not that I don't disagree with some of the things they're saying, but I don't love the way they're communicating it. I don't think that is a helpful way to communicate it. And I certainly don't agree with a lot of the lifestyles of some of these more liberal feminist women, but I don't want to call them whores, and I don't understand what the point of asking their body count is. That seems unnecessary. And for me, I've seen it, I understand what's going on, and I would like to see a better conversation. So I kind of try to think, how do I do that better? And in some ways, that's why I liked Barbie, because it wasn't demonizing to either side. It certainly poked fun at all sides, and yes, it was definitely more rah feminism than masculinity or patriarchy or whatever. But I don't think it was done in the spirit to make people feel stupid. I think it was trying to give a snapshot of what's happening and leave a crumb to say, hey, maybe there's a different way. I don't think everyone understood that. And that's, some might say that's a problem. I think that is just a recognition that some films are more relevant to some people than others, and some people are going to understand certain things than others. But yeah, like the whole idea of the relational dynamics. I think that's what people are really getting at. How do we work together as men and women? Can we work together as men and women? And how do we be the best version of those things? And I don't think the answer is the manosphere. I also don't think it's modern feminism. And those sorts of things do have a way of seeping in to religious cultures of any sort. But I do think that Protestantism is more susceptible to it, because a lot of its goal is trying to pivot to stay culturally relevant, to attract people who are tired of high church. And so I do think sort of what's happening culturally is probably, especially sort of the most modern end of Protestantism is going to have to deal with more issues of that and abuses of that than others. But it's not that it can't go anywhere else. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. So you have so in that last piece where you said maybe Protestantism might be a bit more susceptible to not like necessarily being responsible with that dynamic of like the male and female dichotomy when it comes to like what kind of culture it's going to create or promote, because they may bend a certain way for cultural reasons that they don't really understand the kind of depth underneath that certain thing, like where
Yeah.
perhaps some of these more high church traditions, they have a certain historical wisdom that they're adhering to, where a lot of these low church evangelicals, it's just kind of like, well, we're trying to appeal to men because that clearly works, right? Like
Yeah. Well, and I don't want to say they're not trying to be responsible. I think most church leaders are trying to be responsible. There are certainly, in any situation, there's going to be people who abuse power, and you got bad apples or whatever, right? And so it's getting people in and getting their money more than actually participating in healthy spirituality. But yeah, a lot of Protestantism, it's like, well, we have to reform ourselves, and a lot of that's getting cut off from the wide ranging history of the church and the way that it's developed. And I don't know, for myself, I still struggle with questions of masculinity and femininity, but I I feel more grounded in exploring it in Orthodoxy because of the tradition and some of the ways that that participates and some of the way that the community grows together. Now, again, I think for some people, if you don't have the right spirit or you don't understand Orthodoxy fully, well, even fully, I don't understand Orthodox fully, but if you don't have a comfortability with Orthodoxy, I think it could potentially be damaging. Yeah, but for me, I can say that there have been ways that the tradition of the church and the way that women operate in it has become an easier question to navigate within that frame. But again, it's like I think I've only been exploring Orthodoxy for 4 years, but I've probably only been Orthodox for 2. So in many ways, I'm still a child in it all. And that's, I think, what makes it easier. This recognition of, I don't really know. I want to learn. And just sitting and watching and taking the time, where I feel like a lot of people in culture, but a lot of Protestants feel like we have to fight to get the right version. And I don't know, it's difficult. But again, it might seem like I'm painting a broad brush in Protestantism, because there's a lot of different forms and a lot of different participation. And a lot of the Protestant I came from is sort of towards the end of the Protestant Reformation track as it comes now, where you're in the most modern churches you can, with sort of almost fear of tradition and iconography, and so that's a whole different world than maybe someone who is Lutheran or other high church. Like, I showed my husband a picture of the church I spent most of my high school, middle school years in. And he was like, wait, that's a church? Because they don't really have that here. So it's, again, I've never been to like a Protestant church in Europe. I think they're very different than the things I grew up in. And so that's why it's hard to talk about them in such broad strokes.
Okay, so all right, so going back to the question about like some of this like red pill content and that corner of the internet. It's actually kind of a big corner, right? I mean, I think it's actually bigger
Growing day
than,
and day. Yeah.
oh, is it? Well, that's the
Well,
thing.
I
So
don't know. It feels like it, but I don't totally know.
I think a lot of it was really clickbaity.
Yeah.
And so maybe the clickbaity things, they have like kind of big bang like effects. Um, right? Like it's, a lot more of the stuff starts popping up and you see these headlines and you keep clicking, and then it seems like it's like really big, and then it's probably going to go pretty quickly. Maybe not, but I think so that the pearly things girl that you mentioned, I've seen a few of her videos, and she seemed talk about her for a second, because she seemed kind of entertaining at first. Like you could tell like this person's definitely like a like she could be very entrepreneurial. I think that's what she comes off as, but it's like so nihilistic. It seems like it's like very damning towards women, don't you think? Like it's like
Yeah, there's definitely
um
places where it feels like treading that water. And I don't I don't think she just does it for views, but I certainly think she leans into it because of audience capture. Um, I mean, it's hard for me. I don't really find fighting entertaining. you know, I
Yeah, this is where
We
we
differ.
differ.
Yeah, like I don't want to see a knockout punch. And I understand why people do.
So do you think that's perhaps why this content is more interesting to men? Not because, not even so much because of the content itself, but because, or the topic itself, but rather the knockouts.
Yeah, possibly. Um, but again, it's a certain type of man. Like my husband doesn't find it entertaining at all, and he's like,
Mhm.
"Why are you watching this? You don't like this. Why are you watching this?" And it's like, "Cause I'm studying it." And it's like, "Why am I studying it? Because I want to understand why I don't like it." And maybe that's a bad way to go about it. Maybe it's better that I focus on things that I love and that I give joy and that I think are good.
Mm,
And that's sort of where I'm trying to tend towards. But there's a part of me who, because I'm in media, because I talk about some of these subjects sometimes, or similarly controversial things, maybe not exactly that, but things that get protests and people riled up. Um, I have to understand what's happening
yeah.
to kind of figure out what is it that we can counter. What are we really fighting? Um,
Well, you like want to be able to dialogue with things too. I think that's where I'm at with that.
yeah, yeah, and I mean, it's interesting. I don't find most men in my life, even if they are, uh, the more uh, what some people might consider toxically masculine. They're not bad. And most of them are not pimping out women on OnlyFans and wanting to drive Bugattis
Mm.
for um, selfish reasons. It's certainly a pitfall in men. But here's the thing that I do find interesting. There's something sort of catty about the manosphere, where it's like reputation destruction. It's not just a knockout punch in the like men, because I'm actually not bothered by like wrestling or fighting or sports. Like that doesn't bother me. It's in a healthy arena. People are, uh, you
There
know,
are rules.
there are rules. Things are people are agreeing to things. I don't like cattiness, but that's a very um, female dynamic. And that's what's happening with a lot of this. It's men acting like little girls, saying like you're a whore. Like
That is a profound observation. But
yeah.
I think a couple years ago you would have gotten canceled for saying that, though.
Yeah, probably. And I
Like
think
that's a
that's where cancel culture is starting to kind of fall apart and people are seeing problems with it. I don't want to see it come to another extreme where everything's allowed and, we don't think about the consequences of the things we say.
so that that's really big for me because I do agree with you on the one. Like I agree with your assessment just there. On the one hand, I also find it really interesting that people, uh, men or women on this platform, are saying what they actually think, or like actually saying these things out loud, and they're allowed to. Whereas I always grew up with, you know, when I listen to some of this red pill content, I will admit some of it does resonate with me in terms of my childhood and upbringing as a teenager. And I was like, I think this would have been really bad for me to hear when I
15.
was coming of age. But at the same time, I didn't hear anything when I was a
Yeah.
teenager, and I don't think that was great either.
Yeah. Right.
Um, yeah,
I think it's similar to the way that our generation handled politics. You don't talk about it, right? Like we don't want to offend anybody at the dinner table, so we don't talk about it. We're PC, and so
it was different in my family.
Well, okay. Well, it was a little bit different in my family because everybody was a Republican. So like
Yeah.
you could talk about it and it's sort of like, but like, there was in broader culture, it was sort of like, hey, we're respectful. We don't want to ruffle feathers. And so we don't cross lines. We can talk about it within our circles, but we don't cross lines with these things. And then one thing led to another, and eventually people realized, oh, it's really important to talk about these things, and I want to be part of the conversation. No one taught them how, and so they're just coming in swinging, and they're just trying to do what people are telling them to do, and you know, it creates a lot of this sort of like protest culture, and um, I personally think there's a better way. That's why I try to operate differently than that with what I do here. Um, but I could be naive.
But what I find interesting about the Whatever podcast, and just so you know, like I've pretty much had to cut myself off from all these channels as well because there was at a point where I was like, well, obviously you can only consume so much content in a day at a time, and it was just football season, so that does require a lot of
You had to watch Taylor
sports.
Swift on the Chiefs. I know.
Oh my goodness, I hate it. Okay, anyway, because
Well,
Raider
good
fan
thing.
here,
Yeah, good
I
thing you're a
we're
Raiders fan.
anti-Chiefs. No, but my wife is a Swiftie. Like she's an actual Swiftie. And so she'd be like, "Wait, is Taylor at the game? Then we got to watch it. Like we got to." And I was like, "No, we hate the Chiefs, right?" And she was like, "Well, you do."
Well, you think about my poor dad. He loves the Chiefs. He just wants to watch
Uh-huh.
football. And what do? Oh, there's Taylor. I'm like, oh, poor
There's
dad.
Taylor in a Santa hat. So, do you think there's any kind of like media play in that at all, or do you think this is genuinely like completely separate from all media? Like, is Taylor actually like is that an actual legitimate relationship that has nothing to do with media?
I mean, here's the truth. Taylor Swift gets views. Just like you said, your wife now wants to watch football because Taylor Swift might be there. It is a business move. Taylor plays the game as much as the NFL. She doesn't like people pointing it out, but she flirts with the parasocial thing for views.
But see, I thought she was supposed to be this icon for like white women and freedom and feminism and stuff like that. Why is she going after this, you know, kind of the toxic masculine icon of American culture?
I
Like
think,
Travis Kelsey, like if you had any familiar with Kelsey before any of this, you would be like, what?
yeah, I think Taylor's relationship with wanting to look at a feminist icon has evolved over the years. She still sorts of flirts with it, but I think if you really listen to the breadth of her last album, and I just did a live stream about her album, so maybe you can watch that to get more of my thoughts on the Taylor Swift thing. I think she feels the pain of what that buying into that system cost her, and she wants, in some ways I think she wants a bit of freedom without full responsibility. It's sort of like, I'm gonna have fun and I'm gonna date the football guy, and like, who cares what people say. And in some ways, part of that might be healthy,
But
but I don't know her. I don't know
that
all her
wasn't the way
motives.
it was though. Like for most of her career, most of the time it was like I'm gonna get with like Joe Jonas or whatever, or I'm gonna get with like, the guy that was Loki, or I don't know if she ever dated him, but just like guys that look like that.
Yeah, well, oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah. um
Like where is this coming from? That's what I
yeah, well, it's very hard because if you really look at the timeline of things, she had a lot of short relationships when she was younger, and then she didn't date for a while, or at least she didn't date publicly. And then she dated Calvin Harris for a year, and then it was a couple flings, and then she got in a relationship that lasted 6 years, and then that recently ended, and now she's on Travis Kelsey, but she dated someone else before. So the way that I'm looking at it, it's like it's more complicated than, oh, she just dated a bunch of white guys. It's like
It
I don't
wasn't
know.
the whiteness that I was getting at. It was
Oh,
the more artistic, like uh femi feminine guys.
artistic feminine guys, and now she's with Travis Kelce, and
It
that's
was just like all beer and wings football.
yeah. But I feel like Travis Kelce, push come to shove, at least now would want to come off as respecting women. I don't know him enough.
Yeah, we can.
I know him because my dad likes the Chiefs. So it's like Travis Kelce,
Yeah.
and she's like, she's dating Travis Kelce, and it's like, but all that stuff. It's sort of like it's sort of it gets really complicated because I I can't fully. I understand some of the feminist stuff, but I don't believe in it, a lot of it. So
Okay, so Taylor, that was always kind of a part of her platform. Is that what you're saying? But it wasn't like the meat and potatoes of it.
well, not always. I think 1989 era, she really started to lean into the feminist girl boss thing. And that was after a lot of, because at first it was sort of like she had much more of a conservative Southern sort of perception of relationships, of like, I want the marriage and the kids. And, you know, she talked about heartbreak, but she really wanted that like forever. And then you had her, the string of those in sort of the red era where she was dating people, but it didn't work out for whatever reasons. And she's writing songs about that. And then she gets this criticism of like, you know, she only writes about her ex-boyfriends, and she's giving off this 1950s style view of feminism, wearing, you know, she's dressing like a Kennedy, and, you know, wearing the red
Hmm.
lip. And so then in 1989 she sort of leaned more into the, I'm gonna just be around all my female friends and we're gonna lift each other up, and I'm the girl boss. And then she got deeper into it. There was like the Reputation era, which was very much like, you know, I don't care what you say. You know, I'm gonna rip down my reputation and I'm gonna just be myself, which then led into the Lover era, which was, she was really more political, and not just the feminist stuff. It was like um, the LGBTQ stuff, and I think that was probably the most polarizing time for her, and the time she leaned into it the most. And then she went to folklore and Evermore, which is like, I'm just going to write narrative stories. I think part of
Uh,
that is she, well, one, it was COVID, but kind of feeling the backlash of that, like, what is the responsibility to speak on politics? And as soon as you become an ally, you know, it's never enough.
Yeah,
Um,
so I paid like $700 to send my wife and my younger sister to this Eras concert thing in
yeah, my
Phoenix.
sister was there too.
So
Yeah, how do you
yeah,
feel about the Swift? How do you feel about your wife being a Swiftie?
um, I don't know. I uh
You also don't have to answer that publicly.
I kind of support it in a weird way. It's like I just like seeing her be enthusiastic about something, I guess.
yeah, that's why I think sometimes Taylor Swift gets a bad rep. I definitely don't think everything that she promotes or writes about is something I think is good, or I would want to promote in my daughter. But I do think that she there's something to learn from her, and she has enough honesty to kind of be able to watch and see, what's happening. There's always going to be a bit of a veil, but she lets people in enough to kind of say something. And I wish more people who listen to Taylor Swift would listen to it more deeply, because I do think, there's sort of a phenomenon with Taylor Swift. Because I asked my sister, "What did you think of the Eras tour?" And she said, "It was fine. I really wish she would have done the deep cuts." And that's the kind of like thing that I think, um, I would like to see more Taylor Swift fans be a part of. It's not just, oh, listened to a radio hit. Like, what is the full story of what she's telling throughout her discography? She's got so much of that and life put into it. There's something intriguing about that. But again, it's like the hit, like it's like looking for a high instead of looking for the full story. And
Yeah.
So there's good things about it. There's not so good things about it. Um, it's hard. Like there's a lot of things I like about Taylor Swift. I can't get to the place to call myself a Swiftie, but I do think she's a very interesting person. And yeah, I don't like a lot of the ways that she does get portrayed in media, especially like gossip media. But it's hard because she kind of she plays that game, for her sake. It's like, please, Taylor, just I know it'll get you views. Just stop.
Well, if you do decide to come out of the Swifty closet, I wouldn't think less of you,
Thank you, Christian. I can
just so
sleep
you
well
know.
at night.
So no, but what my wife says that she does is, and I think it's just brilliant, is like whenever there's some like big kind of like media critique of her, like there's this, oh, uh she's this, or oh, she's that, she kind of like writes music in a particular album that really leans into that and is like, oh yeah, I am definitely that. And it's like this kind of sarcastic play on it. And I'm just like, as a dude, that would annoy the hell out of me. Like if I was friends with her, if I was married to her or dating her, because I'd be like, well, no, can you actually like react to that critique, please? Like, but
That
you know,
it's a valid criticism. I should talk to your wife about Taylor Swift. I think that would be so fun. I really want to talk to someone. I thought about asking my sister, but I don't know if she'd want to actually.
my sister's a Swiftie as well.
You know
Yeah,
what? Talk to your Swifty relatives. See if they would be willing to talk to me, because I really am fascinated about that. I can't get to the place where I'm a Swifty, but like I
hmm,
really think there's value in
I think you
listening to
can.
why. Well, no, I just don't think it would be true.
Okay.
You know, because I think I like her more as a person than her body of work, even though I think she's
Okay.
talented. So
Yeah.
that's where this distinction is. Like, if I had the chance to meet Taylor Swift or interview her, I totally would. I think that would be great. And I think she'd be a very interesting person to talk to. I think she'd be a very hard person to talk to. I'd rather just have a private conversation than ever like recorded for the world to see. But yeah, I can respect what she does. It's not my taste.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, I think there's something to learn about that phenomenon, because it's obviously touching at something. And like again, I do think it has something to do with the masculine and feminine and sort of that fragmentation of the female. Because when we're talking about both masculine and feminine in our modern kind of postmodern world, we get to decide what that looks like. And so it's like we're
Yeah.
putting on costumes and trying things on and playing with the expectations, like we're subverting and um, like accepting expectations of what's asked of us. And I don't think that back and forth pattern is healthy in like trying to really figure out the truth of those questions, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Okay, so here's where we jumped from um the question I was wanting to ask into like the Chiefs and Taylor Swift, but okay, so jumping back to the red pill stuff,
Yes.
um what I find really interesting, or what I found, was the Whatever podcast, when they would have like evangelical Christians or Catholics or something like that be guests on the show. Some of them are more high profile than others, but I thought this could be this is actually like really interesting. Like this kind of dialogue is actually happening. Now a lot of it is just like entertainment and kind of like, but I do think that some people are more interested in what religious people have to say about some of these things than they were 3 to 5 years ago.
Yes. I
And
think that's
so,
true.
yeah,
My problem is when we bring it into that arena, we're human. We're much more likely to get dragged into the rules of that game than um, play by a set of rules that is better but not culturally popular. You know,
okay,
if
so
you
rules of what game?
uh, of engagement with human beings, like so like anytime anytime you get on somebody's channel, you're invited into an arena, and there's an unspoken set of rules. You know, like Paul Vanderklay, for example, he's got a set of rules. They're somewhat unspoken, but he kind of, if you watch enough of him, you know the way that that's going to go, and it's not going to go like with the Whatever podcast. But if you go on the Whatever
He's not going to
podcast,
ask anyone what their body count is.
I, I hope not. I don't know if that would be appropriate for the live internet, you know, but I don't think that's on Paul's radar. But yeah, if you're like, I thought about that, like, would I go if someone invited me to a Manosphere thing? Would I go? I'd be very hesitant, not because I don't think those people are worth engaging with. A lot of it is
But you don't
spirits
know
are
the rules, right?
contagious. Well, I don't know all the rules, but I know enough of the rules to say I don't know if that spirit is something I want to be dragged into. I would hope that I could operate in a different way that shows that I find myself a member of a different kingdom, which is Christianity. And I guess I don't have enough. I doubt myself enough to think that might not be wise. And I struggle with that, especially as a creator, where I don't want that sort of fear to stop me from being able to engage and be helpful in places. Because, you know, if people can hear a better story about masculinity, femininity, sexuality, the way you embody that in a life, that can be a really good thing. And like, they have a platform of a lot of people wanting to listen and hear those things. But I don't know. I guess I know my humanity enough to know I'm not above doing exactly what happens every week on those things. And I don't want to dismiss the dignity of people. And like, I'm not afraid to say a harsh word if I need to, but I really think there's a relational aspect that needs to be calculated in to that sort of correction. And I don't think I'm the right person necessarily to provide that to a bunch of strangers.
Okay. So it's interesting because I hear what you're saying there, because I see like that pool of content, like Whatever podcasts and stuff, and then I do hear a more dark web kind of collection of that content in like sometimes the Weinsteins will dive into that, like the Chris
Yeah.
Williamson guy,
Yeah.
when the Modern Wisdom, is that what it's called? And
Yeah,
then
I think so.
um yeah, or something like that. And then also, I mean, everyone's kind of diving in the pond, trying to kind of interact with that spirit a little bit, because I think they are kind of getting at the same spirit. And also, what's that one girl's name? Louise Perry.
Mm-hmm.
I find her really interesting
Mm-hmm.
because she is wrestling with that spirit as well. And it is
Like in a negative
staring, and
way or a positive way?
it's I mean, it seems positive from
Mm-hmm.
my perspective, but
Mm-hmm.
what I was going to say is that it seems like this kind of like unknown spirit. Like we don't actually know, like the we don't know this spirit very well, and
Right.
or maybe we do, and we're trying to, there's just so much unknown, and
Right.
uh
Yeah.
but seeing it all play out is very interesting.
There's something interesting about it, and I think why I have spent the time that I have in it is because I do think that there's a conversation to be had about those things. And but how and what and when and what arenas, we haven't answered that question. I do think my personal journey from Protestant to Orthodox has bred in me a level of caution in all of it. Um, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing depends on the day and depends on which spirit I'm leaning in. I
Yeah.
think it is moving me towards the good in the long term. Um, but yeah, there's a lot of that I'm still wrestling with, because as much as I want to be a good Orthodox, I fail every day.
Yeah.
um, and like, I think, and even when I was a Protestant, um, I still had a lot of similarities in how I saw faith as I do as an Orthodox. Um, it was just harder because you were sort of asked to move into the unknown, um, um, without so many um, checks and balances, and that I definitely got burned by that at times.
Yeah.
And so, but again, isn't that part of life? We have to like move into the mystery of it, and you know, try our best to cultivate a good connection with the thing that's higher than us, to move into those spaces. So I'm very torn about like seeing religious people come on, because it definitely opens the door to something I think people are actually genuinely interested in, which is honest religious exploration. I just wonder how healthy the spirit is and how that's infesting churches across the board.
Yeah, because I view it as like there's this arena where a lot of different spirits are fighting in that arena that are they're all, secular, but they all are fighting, and some of them are fighting with each other, which, for a lot of evangelical Christians, we would look at them and say like we would be opposed to that. There's a God of
Yeah.
sex, and we're trying to kind of dispel that, and there's this God of uh this or that, and now some of these spirits are fighting with each other in this
Uh-huh.
way that was unexpected. And so,
Yeah.
okay, so I thought I think that's really kind of what I wanted to talk to you about is I know that you're saying I'm a little bit hesitant to engage with that spirit, especially on that platform, but this is your platform, so
Hmm.
maybe we could take a stab at it for the last however many minutes.
Yeah.
um
You want to call me a
of
whore?
Yeah, what's your body? No, I'm kidding. um
Sure. Let's do it.
what I was going to ask is what is it like in the Netherlands when it comes to kind of the cultural dynamics of men and women? Is it similar to the US?
It doesn't feel as heated. Again, I live in a small-ish city. It's technically a city, but to me, it feels like I live in a village. But we have city walls, um, and so there doesn't seem to be that much fuss over those questions. There's probably more of that in cities, but there's not as much sort of fighting with those questions as much. And there's not as much animosity, although I do think it's kind of rising. It always sort of seems to start in America and then slowly spill out to other places. So, but again, the male female marriage dynamics are so different, because um, the fact that I didn't want to live with my husband before we got married was an oddity, because in the Netherlands, you date, you live together, you have a baby, and then maybe you get married. And so that was sort of weird, which I don't think is quite, it's getting more normalized in America, but that's still not quite the path.
No, I think
Marriage,
that is a path. It just wasn't in the evangelical like subsect of culture, but no, that's the norm. Like that's the norm I grew up with.
yeah, but it's not uncommon for someone to say, "Oh, I'm a Christian, and I'm saving sex for marriage." That wasn't weird. Like,
Okay,
you knew
that's
people.
yeah,
Where
that's sort of a
it's weird that I'm even religious. They're
okay.
like, there's this saying, my friend Aaron likes to remind me of it all the time, of like, um, there's this word nuchter in Dutch, which basically like be sober. So it's sort of like be normal, uh, or don't be weird. Normal's weird enough. And so when it comes to religion and you say, "Oh, I'm religious," that's weird. Okay, whatever, that's weird. There's 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 a different tension in it than in America. And I still don't fully understand it. I mean, again, I'm only in certain circles, and I do have a lot of friends who are Christian, and for me, I don't think I fully recognize it. For me, it's not. I don't feel like people think it's weird to be normal, but maybe or to be religious, but maybe it's just because I'm used to people uh, who who don't who know people are religious but aren't religious themselves. Like I've been in industries like that all the time, so maybe it's just more normal for me. But that's what I hear from a lot of my Dutch friends who are trying to move towards Christianity. That it's much harder in that um, because of a different type of hostility to Christianity. Where I think what's happening in America, there's hostility outside of the church about Christianity and also inside of the church, and it's like there's just so much infighting you can't you can't quite keep track. Um, yeah, I don't. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Okay, what are the men like there? Would
um,
you say that the men are better, more like
there's
more
not
high
so
value, if you will?
value. They're pretty normal. Like again,
Okay.
they're not showy. Um, you don't have like gym bros. Like there's not a lot of diversity necessarily. Like if you, I don't know if you've met my husband. I don't think you did, but
No.
if you meet my husband, they're they're kind of they're kind of like that. You know, very calm, very direct. Um, you know, um, they're not shy about sexuality. That's for sure.
Okay.
It's not like embarrassing or like there's not much of that there. Like
Yeah, that's what I always thought was kind of strange about like some of those like that's what they say, like those more kind of like Eastern European cultures, like they're not shy about sexuality, but they're also not like it's not like Miami where everyone's just out like revealing everything. It's more of
no,
just kind of like
it's just
it's
there.
not like it's okay to like ask for sex in more direct like kind of stranger dynamics. I don't know.
Well, and nudity isn't. I mean, in Europe, nudity isn't as frowned upon.
Oh,
Like
it's not. Okay. I
well,
thought it would just be
like
too cold. Oh,
but in yeah, but like in certain places. So like when we went to Spain, there was just a woman topless, and it's like it wasn't. It didn't have the sexual charge that it would have had in America. It was sort of odd to see it and be
oh,
like,
interesting. Okay.
it was just sort of like, oh, like she's bathed, like she's just washing the sand off of her. It wasn't like, oh, there's a topless woman, there's like a naked person. Now, obviously, it would be different if you walked into the middle of a food court naked. You know, that's not acceptable. But yeah, it's not. It doesn't feel as glamorized or sexualized. It seems just sort of more of a norm and something people are more willing to talk about.
Okay. All right. So how is did you ever consider yourself to be a feminist? Because like you got married recently, you became a mom recently, but you were a career person.
Mm-hmm.
Like you did go to college, you're well traveled, right? You lived in Australia. Um,
Well traveled.
like you didn't, I don't know, it doesn't seem like you were restrained by the patriarchy as much as a lot of young evangelical women complain about. So
Yeah.
did you ever kind of feel this like a rebelliousness, or did you ever even think about that? Or
Um, the short answer is no. I never considered myself a feminist. Now that didn't mean I didn't think feminists had a point, or that there was something true and good that some feminists had to offer. But I always thought there was too much baggage with the word to call myself a feminist. Um, I definitely think I'm a modern woman. Um, but I also, I kind of joke with my friend Alyssa. She's a Orthodox Jewish woman, and I'm an Orthodox Christian. We always we're like modern trads. We're not like we don't quite fit in sort of what people consider traditional women. Which I think often when you say that, you kind of get the 1950s like I I don't want a job, I just want to serve my husband sort of thing. Um, which is not quite what we are, but we're not quite the modern feminist that, you go girl, you can take on everything, you can have it all. Now, I certainly think I was sort of the person who thought, maybe not I can have it all, but like I want to give a shot to try and do things, um, that show me how to live. Um, I think at times I might have fallen into negative traps of feminism, and I still wonder how much of that affects how I lived my life and how much of that was healthy and good. I don't know. I'm still wrestling with those things, but I don't. Yeah, I definitely was. I found myself sort of in the middle. I wasn't. I wasn't a feminist, but I could see the point. And I was traditional, but I wasn't traditional the way churches kind of wanted you to or assumed you would be if you were a Christian, if that makes sense.
Right, there was a particular thing that was promoted, and some are a little heavier on that than others. Um, I can just say from my perspective of you, like I didn't think you were uh girl boss feminist. But I also thought you were kind of not like you didn't really see like men's spaces as like there was these walls that you really had to climb over too high to get into them. Like you were pretty willing to go into a lot of like what a lot of women would consider men's spaces. Like you would go into comedy clubs and you would go into like even the Paul Vanderklay sphere and stuff like that. That's mostly men. Like it seems like you're not really too like intimidated by that.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I've always had a bit of trouble being friends with women, because I'm very direct and I don't like being catty. And so
Oh,
I was really bad at like navigating those systems, and so it was just somewhat easier to hang out with the guys.
you
Whether that
appreciate the way that they communicate with you better, or
It was just simpler. Um,
okay.
Sometimes I didn't like how they communicated with me because I am a sensitive person. So sometimes people would be um, mean in a way that I didn't like. But then it's sort of, you kind of toughen up from it and you realize, oh, they don't, like, for the most part, people don't have bad intentions. There was also some forms of uh, sexualizing by very few men, but sometimes that made me uncomfortable. But because I was very traditional, that limited those things more. Because I just acted in ways to protect myself. And I had a really good dad that taught me, like, respect yourself.
Yeah.
So that made it easier. Um, but yeah, I, um, I wish, I don't know, like, I sometimes get envious of women who have a lot of women friends. Because
Hmm.
especially being married now, it's not impossible to like have conversation, be friends with men, especially with my husband. He's European. He doesn't have so much pathologies with all of these things, but there's definitely something where you kind of want to be protective of that. Um, so and uh, I'm just bad at small talk. I think and not that I can't do it. I just it's harder for me because I like having deep conversations. Um, and so, uh, yeah, I never saw it as limiting, but I also think I'm just a fringe, uh, partially a fringe woman, because there's a lot of things that are very girly about me. Like um, I love, I love fashion. I wouldn't say I'm fashionable, but I find fashion very fascinating, and I always have. I don't dress up much, but when I was younger, I liked to do the dress up and the Barbies and all of those things. It's,
Yeah.
there are things that are very feminine about me. And again, I'm a very emotional person. I think that is something more feminine, although there are questions about that. There are like complications with all of those things. But I think that's more of it. And I didn't grow up in a household that told me, because you're a woman, it's going to be harder for you.
Hmm.
It was sort of like, okay, if you want to do this, this is how you do it, and you got to figure out what you want. And that meant if I wanted to be a mom, or if I wanted to make films. Like, I think I've told you this story, but like, I was really wrestling with where to go to school to get my cinema degree. And I was talking to my dad and my mom, and wrestling with the different options. And I was thinking about either going to Biola, but there were some issues with me being able to go to Biola. I got in, but I didn't get in. I didn't apply for the program I needed to, so I would have to take another year to finish the degree, and it was like a whole thing. Or go to San Francisco State University, because my sister was moving there and she saw the school and it had a good cinema program. And my dad just said straightforward, Cassidy, most women go to Christian universities to find a husband. Do you want to find a husband, or do you want to be a filmmaker? Oh, well, I want to be a filmmaker. And so that made my decision. And it wasn't that he was unhappy at either of those choices, but it was just sort of
He's
like,
trying to help you make a decision, right?
mm-hmm.
Like, because he
And
didn't want to make the decision for you.
yeah. And so it was sort of like, you got to figure out what makes sense. And my like, it's funny because he had all daughters, and all of his daughters turned out somewhat differently. My youngest sister got married at 20, had her first baby at 21, and has been a stay-at-home mom. He had me, the crazy filmmaker, living in different states. And um, for a while, not sure if I was ever going to get married, but eventually settling with some crazy Dutchman. And then my older sister, who did the college degree in engineering, got a really good job, met a good guy, moved back to Arizona, and then started having kids. And so there's all of this diversity in the path that we lived. And they always kind of just supported us and said, like, have integrity in whatever path you do. The, our religion was more important than whether I was a woman.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
I
Yeah.
know we were wanting to land the plane around this time. I'm happy to keep talking, but I want to respect your time too. Are there any sort of last things or questions?
Yeah, I mean, I have probably a few more minutes. I mean,
Yeah.
but we
Just
can.
whenever you need to go, let me know. We can cut it off. I will make a hard out eventually for the sake of your wife. But
No, for sure. She's not here right now. I have the day
okay.
off because it's, MLK Day in the US, and
Uh,
I am just sitting here in my cold basement, but I got nothing to do because yeah. But in my free so I still have my full-time job,
uh-huh.
but I'm also one of the newer developments in my life is I'm also a part-time, like a assistant wrestling coach, like a high school
Okay.
wrestling coach, because that was a part of my background. And
Yeah.
um so that's been really interesting. And my heart behind that was um the evangelical in me is always wanting to do ministry to some degree. And um
Yeah.
just I always saw myself as someone who could have a lot of like influence over young men,
Mm-hmm.
because I remember when I was a high school wrestler, I wish that, like, I looked at my coaches with like I I don't know, I thought a lot of them, but they didn't really connect with me like on a personal level.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad for everything that they did for me in that field, but I thought they probably could have. Yeah, I mean, I would have liked to know them better, and I don't know, I didn't really have many good male role models in my life.
Mm.
So that's been interesting. So I'll be heading over to do that at about 5 here, which is in a few hours. So I'm not
Okay.
pressed for time, but anyway. But I've been shooting you with questions. So
Yeah.
would
You want
I would
questions?
think
You
you
want
would
to?
want, yeah, I mean, if you have any.
I mean, I think for me, where's your change been in the difference between where we started this conversation, which was how many years ago about Mars Hill, to now? Like, what's the change that has been there for you?
Maybe you have um see, I don't even it's hard because I don't even remember where I was at the time. Like I was telling you, like when we first had that conversation, I think I would resonate with how you're describing things as like how they are in the Netherlands. Like I didn't really think about it much. I mean, maybe I did, but I didn't have a name for it,
Mm-hmm.
and now that's a lot of what's happening in this new culture war is there is a lot of like naming, and it does, give more clarity to certain things, but it's also like revealing some ugly parts of human nature. And
Mm-hmm.
anyway, so to try to answer your question, where have I changed on, I think I think there I think there is a place for um okay. Well, I was listening to something the other day, and I think it was that Louise Perry on the Chris Williamson channel.
Yeah, I listened to that too.
Yeah, and she said something that really got me thinking, and I think that's kind of the answer to where I am, or I'm trying to carve that out. And it's the left kind of has a leg up on the conservatives when it comes to this topic because um she quoted somebody who said something. See, I'm bad at this. She quoted somebody who said, traditions are experiments that worked,
Uh-huh.
but I think it's something similar to like what Brett Weinstein would say. It's like, okay, well, traditions are experiments that worked, but if you take that and say, okay, well, we have to just kind of go back to those traditions, you can't necessarily place yourself in that world.
Right.
And uh, I thought that was really interesting. And
Mm-hmm.
I do agree with it. However, sometimes when I hear that, I'm like, okay, but like, has the world changed? At least, has it changed as much as like in fundamental ways that you're asserting that it has? Because
Yeah.
when I interact with these young kids on my wrestling team, like they're still young kids. They just have phones and clear, like more direct access to porn than we did. Like that, but
Well,
they're still young kids. Like
yeah.
they still want the same things that teenage boys want. They still, they kind of interact with each other the same. Uh, they're still mean to each other. They still bully each other. Like,
Mm-hmm.
um,
They're still humans.
they are still humans.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the big factors of things that changed is technology. We've never had so much information at our fingertips that we can translate into our own language at the snap of a finger. And I don't think our brains were wired to work that way. And so there's a certain distraction and an uncertainty with that. But again, at the end of it, why are they turning to it? Because they're losing sight of those ways to support their human needs and community. Um, and I thought that quote was interesting too. I just kind of get to the question of, is it too materialistic to say that everything's just an experiment? I don't have a good answer to that question, but that's that's sort of what I wrestled with, that where it's like, I think it gets the heart of something important. But is all tradition just man-made experiments? I'm not sure I'm convinced by that. I think there are spirits guiding those things that we don't know. And don't ask me how. I don't know. I just there's this
That's
sense.
intuitive. Yeah.
Yeah. I can't tell you how. I think there is. Um, but yeah, I think you're right. Like I think about that all the time. Everybody says we're in a unique point in history. And I think the more I learn about history, the less I'm convinced that's true. There's certainly unique things about our time in history, but I think there's just as much chaos now as there was then, and there may be less chaos now than there was then. I don't know. Um, but yeah, that's sort of a bigger point. I think another question I would have for you, as a man, do you feel threatened by feminism?
So as a man, do I feel personally um affected by feminism, or is that what you'd ask,
Yeah,
or
like,
am I offended by feminism?
do you think it harms men?
Oh, do I think it harms men? Yeah, I do. I think it harms men. Um,
Do you think it
yeah,
harms women?
yeah, I do. Definitely do. Like,
Mm.
I think, well, I mean, it harms women in some ways, like okay, so when I look at the social media profiles for the girls that were like the hot girls at my high school, most of them are not married and they're 32. And not to be that guy, but it's like if you don't ever want to have children, like genuinely, if you don't want to have children, then feminism, and it may have not, again, my assumption in there is perhaps feminism had something to do with that. I don't know. But if it did, then it did harm you. And so I guess I'll try not to place them in that narrative, but that is the way that I imagine feminism harming women
Hmm. Yeah.
because I'm hearing that there's, um, you know, a human population problem on the horizon. Like, I don't know. Like, all I know is I always assumed that part of what a meaningful life looked like to women, like that was one of those things that I always kind of intuitively knew. It wasn't anything anybody ever told me. I always assumed this to be the case that like women want babies more than they want a husband a lot of the time. Like that was kind of like part of the meaningful
Mm.
path to like life. No, yeah, women want husbands for sure. Like they want like that's definitely a big part of like the meaningful life. And I
Once they
know I
get the
don't want
baby, the husband's gone.
right, well, yeah, praying mantis.
Yeah.
No, I mean, no, I never thought that.
No,
Um,
I'm messing with you.
I know,
I'm joking.
but
I'm joking off your premise.
yeah, for sure. But that was always kind of part of my worldview is like, yeah, that's kind of what a meaningful life to a woman most of the time looks like. I've never like made a religion out of that worldview, but maybe a little bit, but um and what the meaningful life looks like to a man is the same thing, but to provide for that child, not to necessarily create it from his womb because he doesn't have one, but to ultimately set the stage for that life and to provide for it and to
Hmm.
provide for his partner, his wife. Um, And
Mm,
so if that's not happening, then where else are we getting meaning?
mm,
So, going back to what I said, like, yeah, these teenage guys on my wrestling team, like um they're probably affected by feminism in some way. I think that when I talk to these guys, um, they are ambitious, but that ambition is being like the sort of the things that are driving them are I guess the part of St. Louis that I live in is more so like in the black community.
mm,
So I think a lot of these kids are, they're not listening to Jordan Peterson, but they're
mm.
listening to like David Goggins and stuff like that.
I
Like they're
don't know who
really
that is.
inspired. Oh, really?
Mm-mm.
I don't really know how to describe him either, but um yeah, I don't know how to describe him. More in the fitness category,
Okay.
like the
But like the build yourself sort of like.
yeah, kind of like the
Mm-hmm.
build yourself physically because
Mm-hmm.
kind of it, you know, it kind of builds all of you when you can kind of overcome your mind, like you can overcome your body with your mind, that kind of thing. And um anyways, I'm I always struggle to answer your questions, but yeah, I think
You're doing great.
yeah.
I'm enjoying your answer. I want to ask a somewhat personal question, and you can not answer if you don't want. But does your wife want kids? Does
Oh, I
that
thought you were
seem
gonna ask me my body count.
no?
It's like zero. No, I'm kidding. No, at least one, right? Um,
Well, because
yeah, no, she does.
some women don't. Like I have a friend who her and her husband they just don't want kids. They want the dogs and the traveling and the life that provides. Um, so yeah, I wondered if your perception matched what what your wife had in mind, or what you like what her vision was.
Yeah, she wants kids too. And, you know, that's where I think a lot of these red pill guys would probably give me a hard time is because my wife is going to be a doctor and she'll
Mm-hmm.
make more money than I do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I won't be like the breadwinner of our family. Um, it, we won't be able to set up that traditional kind of thing because there's residency and it's a
Mm-hmm.
tough path to become a doctor, a physician in
Mm-hmm.
the US. But yeah, there's nothing I can do about it. It's too late. She's already in med school and can't do anything about it now. But uh, yeah, she wants kids and I want kids. Um, I think I think she's not as like baby feverish as I am right now.
But you're older.
Yeah, I'm older. And
She's still pretty young.
yeah,
Well.
that's one of the things that I tell her is like I don't want to like because I remember how I was as a kid and my dad used to always like kind of wrestle with me and rough me around and I loved it. And I just I don't want to be, you know, too old to do that with my
Mm-hmm.
kids. And I mean, I'm already doing that with high school kids, so I think I'm okay. But uh, I guess if I let this wait too long, I'm gonna I don't know, maybe not be in good enough shape for that to happen. But we'll see.
Yeah, it's a tough reality that biology. Um, and like I think I'm learning a lot about motherhood, in a way that I never could have if I didn't have a kid. And like I think for a while I didn't know if I wanted kids. It's not that I hated kids. I actually enjoyed I watched a lot of kids. I was around kids. I enjoyed it. But like I don't think I knew exactly what that responsibility required and like if I could handle it. But then like eventually I realized at one point like I thought about what it would mean if a doctor told me I couldn't have kids and I would have just cried. And I was like, well, that means something. Um, so I probably want kids, but again, I had um, such a different look at it than I did now. I think orthodoxies helped shape that, but I think just being a mom now, you realize um, a lot of things about um, what people see as traditional womanhood do have a lot to do with biology. And like Louise Perry in that Chris Williamson podcast talked about this. Like as a woman, when you're breastfeeding, you're doing that about 40 hours a week. And I did the calculations, and she's correct. So you're like a full-time dairy cow.
Yeah.
And um, you know, now a lot of jobs are much easier to do by both men and women. Like there's not like hard labor and small things that women can't do. Like anybody can technically be like a data security person. There may be certain tendencies of men to make men more interested in that type of work, but it's work that both men and women can do. But think about it, when we didn't have technology, when we didn't have computers, you had to be able to do a job that could keep you at home, to keep the baby safe, that you could pick up and stop while breastfeeding a baby and tending a home. So it made more sense for a man to go out into the fields and do the hard labor, and the woman to stay home and do the tending and those things. And sort of this 1950s fever dream of women staying at home, putting dinner on the table for their husband, and just cleaning the house is not historically what the traditional family looked like. And it is honestly not exactly what that looked like in the 50s. A lot of them had a lot of community efforts that they would be a part of too. So they might not have had paid work, but they were doing a lot to keep communities running. And nowadays we're outsourcing community tasks that used to go to women. Like instead of you cleaning the church, a lot of people will hire a janitor. There's a lot of trade-offs that come with those things. And so you realize why you realize why a lot of women, once they have a kid, decide, I'm going to put the work aside, because there is a sacrifice to yourself of what you want to better suit the family and the needs of the family. Because with formula, it makes it easier. But like that baby, like it grew inside of you and it knows you more intimately than the father.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something about that requires the woman to be around for the baby in a way that a father just can't. It's a hard reality to swallow for women who really do want to go out and make a career for themselves. But I don't know. I think that there's something beautiful about that path. I heard someone, and I don't remember where it was or who said it, but someone made the observation that men are meant to go out and lead in the world, or something like that, but women are meant to lead in like childbirth and like bringing life into the world. So men like protect the world, and women are the ones leading, bringing life into the world. And I think there's something interesting in that process. And I think if more women didn't automatically assume that motherhood was a burden and should be avoided, and that there might be something, even if you don't see it, interesting in that path, there are things to pick up on that story that are really powerful and empowering. But people are like, I don't want to be just a mom. I don't want to be just a mom, but that's not because, I think now it's not because I want to have it all. It's because I want to do the best for my kids and my community. And so what does that mean? And, in modern life, if I was just a mom, I would be disservicing a whole bunch of things that I could do for like my community and my environment. And so I'm learning to be patient and say it's okay that I'm just a mom. But how do you find the proper orientation and place in the world? It's difficult. And I agree with you. I think there's going to be a lot of women in their 40s who realize they're missing something, but it might be too late to get. And that's sad to me.
Yeah. And like, again, I'm not putting myself in that, like, I'm not trying to contribute to that kind of red pill dog pile of,
No.
you know, hey, you guys are, it's like I'm almost like watching your ship, crash into the giant iceberg that is
Right.
your age and your fertility declining and missing the boat and
Mm-hmm.
like I'm not enjoying watching that. But
Mm-mm.
on the other hand, like there is that isn't the only path for
No.
women. Like I can admit that. I think that is the kind of the path for most women, though. I do think there is a vision for that, and I would imagine that like women like yourself probably recognize that and try to promote it and not necessarily say, okay, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to call all women whores, and when they
No.
come to realize that they're whores, they repent of their sins and pray for the forgiveness of the red pill God and for their salvation and grace so that they can find the high value husband and that will save her.
No,
But
I think I'm more responsible for my own misguided participation in whatever sin than anybody else is.
mm,
Um, you know, I really have no, I have no, I have no desire to throw the first stone. I have no right to throw the first stone. Um, I do think these are conversations I'd like to be had and see them be healthy. But I don't think they can be had with everybody. And I do think that there is probably underlying some of this red pill stuff, an idolization of marriage that's unhealthy, because there are paths of monasticism that can be healthy and you can have a marriage without a kid and still live a full life. I do think there is good reason to try and aim that participation in life towards the service of others and not the gratification of self, to understand what it is to be more human. But that's the Christian in me. And so if you're asking me that, that's the story that I find most beautiful. And that's where I want to see a difference. I don't want to talk about what's terrible and horrible and make
hmm.
you feel degraded. I want to talk about the beauty that rests in tradition and religion, um, and not in a way that is trying to compel you to do it because, as a good consumer, you should. Just because it's true and good, and whether you believe it or not, this is what I've seen, and maybe it'll help you, but if not, that's okay. um,
Yeah.
and I think too many people are on a mission to evangelize for their ideal of masculinity, femininity, or whatever. Um, and I don't feel comfortable. I don't ever feel comfortable being in that position myself. But
Yeah, I do. I will say that has been one of the more interesting parts of that conversation that I've spent time thinking about is the idea of like the gender occupations or like the kind of what we would attribute to as masculine and feminine. It's like, okay, being a plumber, that's a masculine thing. It's like, okay, yeah, yeah, probably still, but what we're getting at is, okay, well, working, period, is not masculine. We know that now. Like earning a wage in it of itself is not a masculine thing. I think that's kind of what we're doing as a culture now is trying to kind of we're rethinking that, resorting that.
yeah, well, I think
Really, yeah.
why do we associate certain things with masculine and feminine? Well, it's because more men tend to be in a field than another. Maybe that's some of that's personal choice and inner wiring, but some of that does have to do with biology. Like I think men are generally stronger. Like I don't know if I would be able to have the strength to uh, pull like whatever you need to do in plumbing. I don't know. I have no idea. But like to change a tire, I could probably do it. It would be much more efficient if my husband did it because he has the strength. And I think some of the natural roles came to just that. Like, what is the best allocation of our resources? And with men and women together, you can produce life, literal life, but you also have this the strength, the different strengths. And so now we have to allocate those resources. And I think a lot about this in military. I have no strong opinions about what we should do with military, but I do think about the safety we put people in by putting women on a battlefield. Because if you have you ever seen those TikTok videos where husbands and wives like play drills like there's a fire in the house?
No, I haven't.
So there's these TikTok videos where men and women they're like, "Oh, there's a fire," and they pass out. Every husband can pick up that wife on their shoulder, walk them out. Every woman is trying to figure out how do I roll my husband onto a carpet so that I can like maybe pull him out of the house. You can't deny that reality. And so if we're putting someone on the battlefield who's unable to lift a wounded soldier, you're putting a lot of people at risk. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't have women in the military. That's not my argument. It's just something I've thought about, and I think we should think more about in the questions of how do we treat men and women both with dignity, and like realizing, hey, I have to accept my limitations and be willing to deny my own wants and desires of independence for the better operation of others.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's like, again, I think in previous generations, it's stuff that we didn't have to really talk about because, I mean, maybe it's just because things were sort of a given. It's like, okay, well, where am I naturally going to be? Yeah, where am I naturally going to find myself most useful? Um,
when there was less globalization,
yeah,
so all of a sudden now all of these worlds that we would have never had contact with before are becoming like front and center, and they're shaping the way we think and believe. I don't think we take enough responsibility for that. Um, and yeah, I don't know if the answer is complete sheltering of technology and media. But I do think it means we have to be better at uh, managing that. And I don't think we can do those things alone. I do think we have to do those things within community. But it's hard because we've got a lot of different ideas about how to put those things out in community.
yeah, yeah. It's interesting because in my church denomination, I am now like evangelical Presbyterian. It's like one of those small split offs from Presbyterian, and it's basically like what do you call it? PCA, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
It's Presbyterian Church of America, so like I guess the major American conservative denomination, but the only thing is there is a little bit more friendliness with charismatic stuff like spiritual gifts, and then also you can have women in leadership.
Mm-hmm.
So like women can be head pastors, which truthfully I actually don't know if I am on board with. I think I'm a part of the denomination, so I have to like I'm okay with it, but like
Yeah, that's a whole nother can of worms.
right, I know exactly, and I know that I mean you being an Orthodox, you're probably have some relief in saying like, look, whatever my opinion is on that, it doesn't. I kind of don't have to worry about it because I'm not changing anything, and
There's a
it's not.
relief, but there's also a struggle. I don't personally have issues with the priest thing. The way that it's been explained to me, like in the symbolic thing that's happening, um, I don't know, it just makes sense. So I don't have to fight that, but I have, I have sympathy for people who see things and question. But yeah, there is a little bit of relief in the realization of like I I I suspend my own will for the will of another, the
Right.
will of something higher. And that's not easy. And there's certainly pitfalls that come with it. Um, but there are benefits.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, but
Um,
we should probably land the plane.
yep,
Last
definitely.
last thoughts. You can get your knockout punch in now. Make the algorithms go crazy.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, whenever we talk, I have a bunch of thoughts because
Yeah.
I'm not like I've kept up really closely with, the Paul Vanderklay channel and all these different platforms that it's introduced me that he's introduced through his own channel and the stuff I would have that I love that he does, and I would have never stumbled onto like Mary Harrington if it weren't for people like him. Um, and but at the same time, I don't interact with the this little corner group and stuff like that. I don't. Every now and then I'll throw a comment on Paul's videos, but I don't participate in the live streams like you do, and I'm not really like well acquainted with uh the normal faces like you are. Um, Sometimes I wish I was because I like listen to them all the time. I almost feel like I am a part of it, but um, I probably don't have the time to participate in
Yeah.
all that. But in like the conferences and the festivals and like it all looks like fun and like, but it's a little like my wife has no idea what I'm doing when I when I listen to that stuff. And anyway,
Yeah, it's always hard because like for myself and a lot of people there's a lot of good that come from it, but it has so many pitfalls. And I myself have tried to find ways to ground it more in my reality so I'm not so much online. But um, yeah, because I have made relationships, there's something built that I have more of the ability to jump in when I did have more time on my hands than I do now. Um, but yeah, it's interesting to see what will happen. Um, Honestly, it's probably good. Like you're in a you're in a new state, you're in a new city. Like you're trying to figure out the denomination stuff. Focus on that. You don't need to go talking on the internet with everybody. It's
yeah,
like there's fun in it, but there's probably if there's ways you can find that and where you are, that's probably healthier. I would say. Um, but like I'm glad we get to talk because I do enjoy our conversations. They definitely make me think also. And you've always been someone easy to talk with because I know you're not going to placate me, but you let me say what I need to say and like kind of understand it. So that's always nice.
yeah. Well, sometimes I feel like I do just sometimes I feel like I don't communicate very well with you because I do just bombard you with my own questions. But part of that, I'm glad that you're telling me that's not the case because yeah, I mean when we talk, I do feel like because I'm like listening to Paul Vanderklay's channel like every day, and I'm listening to you and Chad and all these people. I've never met Chad in my life, and like, you know, I do feel like that is like you are kind of the only person that I get to interact with from, you know, that corner of the internet. And
Well,
in a way,
Christian,
it does make me feel like I am a part of what's going on there through
Christian,
you.
you're the only reason I'm in this. I didn't know Paul. You're the one who said, "Here, go talk. Go. You might hate this guy, but go
I know.
listen to him." So like, unbeknownst to anyone else, you're like the or like X-Men origins of like me being some sort of popular face in this corner.
Yeah, it's
I,
interesting.
you know, it's it's interesting. And like, yeah, you asked me a lot of questions, but I find that helpful
Hmm.
because it makes me think deeper and dig down. And I sometimes feel like I'm not helpful because I tend to just like ramble. I'm like, I don't know if I answered your question, but um, I don't know. That's part of conversing. And yeah, it's like it's my show, quote unquote, but like I really just try to have conversations like I would in a bar or at a cafe or like in a group of friends, like, because it's helpful for me to learn how to have conversations, but I think it's helpful for other people to see too, because you can have these conversations and it's not a tear down, drag out fight. It's two people with different ideas and beliefs trying to meet each other and like known and be known and know others.
Yeah. Yeah, I hope so.
Me too. I mean, I I could be wildly mistaken, but that's what I hope. That's what I
Hmm.
see, and so I keep
Yeah.
doing it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well, I'll what time is it you're where you are? I'll let you
Nine
go, but
9:12. It's yeah. I should probably go, but I have a baby that likes to keep me up till 2, so it's probably a good time to stop. But
yeah.
yeah, thank you. I really enjoyed the conversation, and again, I need to get you and Nathan together in a conversation.
Yeah, for sure. I think what was that going to be about again? Just like kind of like
Denominations,
denominational things
yeah,
and
like
yeah, that would be great.
yeah. We'll do that. We'll figure it out.
Okay. Sounds good.
Thank you so much for watching. As always, I'll close with the Serenity Prayer. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.